The rain tasted of coal dust and regret. It always did in Oakhaven. Elias traced the condensation on the windowpane, the blurry streetlights of the town bleeding into the gray. Inside, the aroma of his mother's apple pie clung to the air, a familiar comfort that felt increasingly hollow. He's been home for 3 years. 3 years since the incident. 3 years of polite smiles, forced conversations, and the relentless, suffocating normalcy of Oakhaven. He was 26, technically an adult, but felt like a ghost, inhabiting his childhood bedroom. The walls were plastered with faded posters of bands he no longer listened to, heroes he no longer admired. His father, a man carved from granite in quiet disappointment, sat across the kitchen table, meticulously cleaning his hunting rifle. The click of metal on metal was the soundtrack to Elias's existence. "Rain's gonna keep up all night," his father grunted, not looking up. Elias nodded, pushing a forkful of pie around his plate. It was good, as always. His mother, a woman whose kindness seemed to radiate from her very bones, bustled around the kitchen, wiping surfaces and offering small, encouraging smiles. They were good people. They just didn't understand. They couldn't. He's tried to explain, of course. Tried to articulate this tale. The weight of the world pressing down. The echoes of screams. The shimmering, impossible light. But the words always crumbled in his mouth, leaving him feeling foolish and isolated. They'd patted his hand, offered him another slice of pie, and gently suggested he take up woodworking, as if carving a bird from pine could erase the memory of everything. He worked at the hardware store now, shelving nails and advising elderly women on the best brand of fertilizer. It was a life of quiet desperation, a slow, agonizing fade into the background. The town expected him to settle, to marry Sarah Miller, the baker's daughter, and become a pillar of the community. A predictable, safe, and utterly soul-crushing prospect. He's seen the pity in their eyes, the unspoken question, "What happened to you, Elias?" He avoided the town square. The annual Oakhaven Harvest Festival was approaching, a riot of color and forced merriment that felt like a personal affront. He's seen the children pointing, whispering. He's heard the hushed conversations that stopped when he walked by. He missed the chaos. He missed the adrenaline. He missed the feeling of being needed. He remembered the desert, the heat shimmering off the sand, the camaraderie of his team. He remembered the purpose, the drive, the feeling of being part of something larger than himself. He's tried to bury it, to convince himself it was a dream, a delusion. But the nightmares always returned, vivid and relentless. He looked out the window again, the rain blurring the edges of the world. A single crimson leaf clung to the branch of the old oak tree in the yard, a defiant splash of color against the gray. He felt a familiar ache in his chest, a longing for something he couldn't name, a yearning for a life that felt real. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed 7 times, a mournful sound that echoed the emptiness within him. He pushed back from the table, the uneaten pie a heavy weight on his conscience. "Going for a walk," he mumbled, not bothering to meet his father's gaze. He pulled on his worn leather jacket and stepped out into the rain. the cold droplets a sharp contrast to the warmth of the kitchen. The town was quiet, the streetlights casting long, distorted shadows. He walked without direction, the familiar streets feeling alien and oppressive. He stopped at the edge of town, looking out at the dark rolling hills that bordered Oakhaven. A single distant light flickered in the darkness, a tiny spark of something unknown. He stared at it, a flicker of something akin to hope stirring within him. The rain was a cold, insistent hand on his skin, plastering his hair to his forehead. Elias didn't notice. He's been walking for nearly an hour, the familiar scent of baking bread and wood smoke fading behind him, replaced by the damp earth and the sharp tang of approaching wilderness. Oakhaven, with its neat rows of houses and the cheerful banners strung for the harvest festival, felt miles away, a painted backdrop to a play he couldn't remember auditioning for. He's been avoiding the festival, of course. The forced smiles, the well-meaning inquiries about his recovery, the subtle pity in their eyes. It all felt like a tightening noose. His mother's persistent suggestions about marrying Clara, the baker's daughter, felt like a final nail in a coffin he hadn't even realized he was lying in. He's drawn to the hills now, a compulsion he can't explain. The rain obscures the path, turning the familiar landscape into a blurred canvas of greens and grays. He's always known the hills were there, a constant backdrop to his life. But he's never truly seen them, not like this. Then he saw it, a flicker, a tiny, defiant spark of light in the distance, nestled amongst the ancient trees. It wasn't the warm, inviting glow of a hearth fire. It was something different, something wilder. It pulsed with an energy that resonated deep within him. A forgotten chord struck in his soul. He stumbled, the mud sucking at his boots. But he kept moving, drawn towards the light like a moth to a flame. The trees grew thicker, their branches intertwined, creating a tunnel of shadows. The rain seemed to lessen, the air growing heavy with the scent of pine, and something else, something ancient and unknown. He pushed aside a curtain of ivy, and the light grew stronger. It emanated from a small clearing, bathed in an ethereal glow. In the center stood a single weathered stone, etched with symbols he didn't recognize, yet felt he should. Around the stone a circle of stones lay scattered, and within that circle a woman stood. She wasn't young, nor was she old. Her face was etched with lines that spoke of hardship and wisdom. Her eyes the color of storm clouds. She wore clothes of woven leaves and bark, and a single silver feather was braided into her long, dark hair. She didn't seem surprised to see him. She simply looked at him, her gaze piercing, unwavering. "You've been running," she said, her voice a low hum that seemed to vibrate in the very air around him. He opened his mouth to deny it, to offer some flimsy explanation, but the words wouldn't come. He felt exposed, stripped bare by her knowing gaze. "The light calls to those who are lost," she continued, her eyes fixed on his. "Do you hear it, Elias?" He felt a tremor run through him, a deep resonance within his chest. He didn't understand, but he knew with a certainty that bypassed reason that she was speaking of something more than just a light in the hills. She was speaking of a path, a possibility, a way out. He looked back towards Oakhaven, a cluster of warm lights visible through the thinning rain. It felt distant, unreal, a life he no longer recognized. Then he turned back to the woman, to the clearing, to the unknown that lay before him. The light pulsed, beckoning. He took a tentative step forward, the mud squelching beneath his boots. The rain plastered Ilara's hair to her face, mirroring the dampness clinging to Elias's own skin. He watched her, the flickering firelight dancing in her eyes, and the words hung in the air, heavy and expectant. A path. A chance. Understanding. It sounded dangerous. He swallowed, the dryness in his throat a stark contrast to the rain. I don't know, he mumbled, the sound swallowed by the rustling leaves. He looked back towards Oakhaven, the warm glow of the windows, a beacon of what he knew. What was expected? His mother's apple pie cooling on the windowsill, his father's gentle suggestion to try his hand at carving a bird. Sarah, the baker's daughter, her smile bright and hopeful, already planning their future. He'd almost feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on him with tangible force. A comfortable weight, in a way, a predictable one, a safe one. What is this path exactly? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't want to know. He truly didn't, but the question had to be asked. It was a desperate attempt to find a loophole, a reason to retreat. Ilara's gaze remained steady, unwavering. It is a journey into the heart of the Shadowlands, a place where memories are not forgotten, but confronted, where the echoes of the past resonate with a power that can heal or destroy. Destroy. The word struck him like a physical blow. He thought of his nightmares, the fragmented images he fought to suppress, the feeling of being hunted, of failing. He spent 3 years building a wall around those memories, brick by painstaking brick. To tear it down, to face whatever lay behind it, it was unthinkable. He thought of his father, his face etched with concern, his voice laced with a quiet sadness. He's tried so hard to be the son his father wanted, the man Oakhaven expected, to abandon that, to chase a phantom promise in a place called the Shadowlands. It would break his father's heart. Sarah's face swam into his mind, her hopeful eyes reflecting a future he couldn't possibly fulfill. He saw the disappointment that would surely follow, the quiet resignation that would settle over her. He couldn't inflict that on her. He wouldn't. He shifted his weight, his gaze fixed on the muddy ground. The rain seemed to intensify, a mournful soundtrack to his internal struggle. He felt the pull of the unknown, the desperate yearning for something more. But the fear was a stronger force. The comfort of the familiar, the safety of expectation, held him captive. I can't, he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He didn't meet Ilara's eyes. I appreciate the offer, but I need to stay. I have responsibilities. He turned, taking a hesitant step back towards the faint glow of Oakhaven. The path behind him seemed to lengthen, the distance between him and the woman growing with each stride. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He just kept walking, back towards the life he knew, the life he was expected to live, the life that felt increasingly like a slow, suffocating death. The rain tasted of ash. It clung to the cobblestones of Oakhaven, slicking the lamplight into hazy halos. Elias watched it fall, the familiar rhythm, a dull ache against the frantic beat of his heart. He should be inside, sharing a meager supper with his father and Sarah. He should be reciting the day's accounts, pretending contentment. But the pull, a silent, insistent tug, had grown too strong to ignore. He's been feeling it for weeks, a whisper at the edge of his dreams, a chill that settled deep in his bones, despite the hearth's warmth. It led him here, to the edge of town, where the last houses surrendered to the encroaching darkness. Beyond lay the Shadowlands. He remembered his grandfather's warnings, hushed tales of a place where memories clung like cobwebs, where the past refused to stay buried, a place best left undisturbed. But the memories weren't quiet anymore. They clawed at the edges of his mind, fragmented images of a day he desperately tried to forget. He thought of his father, his face etched with concern. He's grown weary, the weight of the farm pressing down on him. Sarah, too, deserved more than a son consumed by shadows. He owed them a life, a future, a normal life. He turned to go back, the cobblestones cold beneath his worn boots. The scent of baking bread drifted from a nearby window, a poignant reminder of the comfort he was denying himself. He could almost hear Sarah's laughter, the gentle cadence of his father's voice. Then a flicker of light, not the warm glow of Oakhaven's lamps, but a cool, ethereal luminescence emanating from the heart of the Shadowlands. It pulsed, beckoning. He hesitated, the familiar arguments warring within him. Duty versus desire, obligation versus the desperate need to understand, to remember. A figure emerged from the light, a woman cloaked in shadows, her face obscured by the gloom. She didn't speak, didn't gesture. She simply stood, an invitation hanging in the air. He recognized her then, though he's never seen her before. Alara, the name whispered in hushed tones, a legend amongst the older villagers. A guardian, some said, a prisoner, others claimed. He took a tentative step forward, the rain plastering his hair to his forehead. The air grew colder, the scent of ash intensifying. The familiar sounds of Oakhaven, the clatter of carts, the distant murmur of voices faded into a profound silence. He saw a brief flash of his past, a chaotic swirl of color and sound, a feeling of overwhelming loss. It vanished as quickly as it appeared, leaving him trembling. The past isn't gone, Alara said, her voice a low murmur that seemed to resonate within his very bones. It simply waits to be understood. He looked back at Oakhaven, the faint glow of the lamps a fragile promise of warmth and belonging. He saw Sarah standing in the doorway of their house, her face a pale silhouette against the light. He saw the weariness in his father's shoulders, the quiet resignation in his eyes. He thought of the farm, the endless cycle of planting and harvesting, the constant struggle against the elements. He thought of the expectations, the unspoken burdens he carried. He took another step, then another. until he stood on the threshold of the Shadowlands. The light enveloped him, swallowing him whole. He didn't look back. The rain continued to fall, washing away the last vestiges of Oakhaven. He felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet acceptance of the darkness that awaited him. He was no longer Elias of Oakhaven. He was something else now, something lost, something searching. The door to Oakhaven closed with a soft click, the sound swallowed by the encroaching shadows. The faint glow of the village lamps grew dimmer, until it was nothing more than a distant memory. He felt a fleeting pang of regret, a whisper of what might have been. But the past was calling, and he had to answer. The rain tasted of ash, a constant grit on his tongue. It had been falling for days, mirroring the ceaseless drizzle of despair that clung to the edges of his heart. He stood at the edge of the Vale, the boundary between the known world of Athelgard and the shadowed expanse of the Shadowlands. The stones were slick with moisture, cold and unforgiving beneath his worn leather boots. His father's voice echoed in his memory, a familiar reprimand. "Duty binds us, Elias. The line demands it. The line." Generations of wardens, tasked with monitoring the Vale, ensuring the darkness remained contained. It was a legacy, a burden, a cage. He glanced back at the village. Smoke curled from the chimneys, a fragile promise of warmth and normalcy. Sarah stood on the porch of her father's workshop, her silhouette framed by the flickering lamplight. He remembered the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed, the scent of lavender that clung to her hair. A memory, sharp and sweet, pierced the gloom. He squeezed his eyes shut, pushing it away. Sentiment was a weakness. The rumors about Alara, the Shadow Walker, were as pervasive as the rain. Some whispered she was a demon in disguise. Others claimed she was a forgotten goddess. All that was known was that she resided within the Shadowlands, and that she alone held the key to understanding the growing instability of the Vale. His father had forbidden him from seeking her out, deeming her influence too dangerous. But the tremors had grown stronger, the shadows deeper. Athelgard was teetering. He felt a chaotic swirl of color and sound, a fragmented echo of a forgotten dream. A flash of crimson, a snatch of a mournful melody, then nothing. The past was a phantom limb, aching with a loss he couldn't name. "It's not cowardice," he muttered, the words swallowed by the rain. "It's necessity." He was not abandoning his duty. He was fulfilling it in a way his father couldn't comprehend. The line demanded protection, and to protect Ethelgard, he had to understand the darkness. He saw her then, a figure as indistinct as the swirling mists. Elara. She stood motionless, a silent sentinel at the threshold of the Shadowlands. Her face was obscured by shadow, her eyes like chips of obsidian. She offered no greeting, no invitation, only a stillness that felt ancient and profound. He took a breath, the air thick with the scent of decay, and something else, a something indefinable, like the memory of a forgotten language. He tightened his grip on the warden's staff, the familiar weight, a small comfort in the face of the unknown. He stepped across the Vale. The world shifted. The rain ceased. The familiar scent of Athelgard vanished, replaced by a chilling stillness. The ground beneath his feet felt strangely soft, yielding. He felt a fleeting pang of regret, a whisper of what might have been, but the past tasted like a forgotten dream, and the shadows beckoned, and he could not refuse. The veil shimmered, a heat haze distorting the familiar shapes of his father's study. It wasn't a physical barrier, not truly, but a thinning, a tear in the world's fabric. Elias braced himself, the weight of the warden's staff suddenly heavier in his hand. It wasn't courage that propelled him forward, he knew. It was a grim acceptance, a resignation to the path laid out for him. It's not cowardice, he told himself, the words a fragile shield against the tremor in his hands. It's duty. His father's disappointed gaze burned into his back. Even though the man was a statue of grief and expectation. Sarah's face, pale and worried, swam in his memory. He'd promised her he wouldn't go. He'd promised her safety. But the line demanded it. The whispers had grown too insistent, the shadows lengthening beyond the borders of the known world. He stepped through. The air thickened, tasting of dust and something indefinably wrong. The familiar scent of beeswax and old leather vanished, replaced by the cloying sweetness of overripe fruit and the metallic tang of something ancient and cold. The light fractured, painting the landscape in hues of bruised purple and sickly green. The ground beneath his boots was not stone, but a spongy, yielding substance that felt disturbingly alive. Elara awaited him. She was a silent sentinel, carved from the very stone of the Shadowlands. Her eyes, pools of liquid night, held no warmth, only an unsettling stillness. She did not speak, but her presence was a command. The blight spreads, she communicated, the words forming in his mind, not spoken aloud. The guardians are failing. He felt a surge of panic, quickly suppressed. He was a warden now. He had a duty. Where? She gestured with a hand that seemed to be woven from shadows. North, the whispering cairn. They are the nexus. The journey was a descent into a landscape of perpetual twilight. Twisted trees clawed at the sky, their branches laden with phosphorescent fungi. Grotesque creatures, half-formed and writhing, slithered through the undergrowth, their eyes burning with malevolent curiosity. He fought them off, the warden's staff a blur of motion, each strike echoing with a hollow resonance. He felt the power within the staff, a cold, alien energy that both strengthened and drained him. He encountered others remnants of the guardians, broken and despairing. They spoke of a growing darkness, a corruption that twisted the land and warped the minds of those who lingered too long. They spoke of a being, a presence that orchestrated the chaos. They called it the Weaver. One guardian, a woman with eyes like shattered glass, clutched his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "He's coming," she rasped, her voice a dry whisper. "The Weaver. He tests us. He breaks us." He pushed past her, the weight of the line pressing upon him. He couldn't falter. He wouldn't. He had to reach the whispering cairns. He had to find a way to stop the Weaver. He felt a presence, a subtle shift in the air, a prickling on the back of his neck, He spun around, staff raised, but saw nothing, only the oppressive gloom and the silent, watchful trees. He was being watched. He was being tested, and he knew with a chilling certainty that the true enemies were not the creatures that lurked in the shadows, but the doubts that gnawed at his soul. He was something lost, something searching, and the Weaver was waiting. The air thickened, a viscous pressure against his skin, as Elias crossed the final demarcation. The line, a shimmering distortion that had always felt like a boundary, dissolved behind him, leaving him standing on ground that wasn't quite ground. It was a spongy, yielding surface, choked with phosphorescent fungi that pulsed with an unsettling rhythm. Twisted trees clawed at the sky, their branches gnarled and skeletal, devoid of leaves. The metallic tang of something ancient and cold permeated the air, a taste that clung to the back of his throat. He repeated the mantra, a shield against the creeping dread. "It's not cowardice, it's caution." He gripped the warden's staff, the familiar weight a small comfort in this alien landscape. The staff hummed faintly, a sympathetic vibration against his palm, a silent reassurance that he wasn't entirely alone. The Shadowlands, a place spoken of in hushed tones during his training, a place where the Weaver held sway. The Weaver, a name whispered with fear and reverence, a force that twisted reality and preyed on the vulnerabilities of the line. He projected his thoughts, a silent pulse of communication, towards the other wardens. Approaching the inmost cave, no immediate threats detected. The response was a flicker of acknowledgement, a shared burden of responsibility. He knew they were watching, their presence a distant echo in the oppressive silence. The path ahead was not a path at all, but a suggestion, a vague impression of where the inmost cave should be. The landscape shifted and warped around him, a mockery of direction. He trusted the staff, letting it guide him, its subtle vibrations pulling him deeper into the heart of the Shadowlands. He passed the remnants of other wardens, broken statues slumped against the twisted trees, their faces frozen in expressions of terror. A single cracked eye of one seemed to follow him, a silent accusation. He didn't linger. Each fallen warden was a testament to the Weaver's power, a grim reminder of the stakes. "It's not weakness, it's respect." He repeated the mantra, the words a desperate attempt to maintain control. The ground grew colder, the phosphorescent glow intensified, casting long distorted shadows that danced around him like mocking spirits. He sensed them then, the creatures of the Shadowlands. Not visible, not yet, but present. A pressure against his mind, a subtle probing, a silent assessment. He reinforced his mental shields, a practiced defense against the Weaver's influence. He stumbled upon a cairn, a pile of stones edged with swirling symbols. As he passed, a voice thin and reedy echoed in his mind. Lost, all lost, he ignored it, focusing on the path ahead. The voices were a distraction, a lure into despair. "I am not a coward. I am a warden." The air grew heavy, suffocating. He felt a presence, vast and ancient, watching him. Not a physical presence, but something far more insidious. The Weaver. He couldn't see it, couldn't sense its form, but he knew it was there, toying with him, testing his resolve. The ground began to tremble. Chasm opened before him, a gaping maw of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. He hesitated, a flicker of doubt threatening to consume him. He saw Sarah's face, a fleeting image of warmth and love, a silent plea. He pushed it away, focusing on the task at hand. He crossed the chasm, the staff humming louder now, a beacon in the encroaching darkness, the inmost cave. It was close now. He could feel it. A palpable weight on his mind, a vortex of corrupted energy. He braced himself. The final confrontation was inevitable. He was a warden. He would not falter. He would protect the line. He would face the Weaver. It's not fear, it's duty. The air thickened with each step, a viscous weight pressing against his lungs. The spongy surface beneath his boots yielded with a sickening squelch, a constant reminder of the rot that permeated this place. Twisted trees, their branches gnarled and skeletal, clawed at the sky, blotting out the last vestiges of sunlight. He repeated the mantra, a desperate anchor in the rising tide of despair. It's not cowardice, it's duty. The path, if it could be called that, wound deeper into the Shadowlands. The silence was profound, a suffocating blanket that amplified the frantic hammering of his own heart. He scanned the gloom, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, the familiar way to small comfort. Fallen wardens lay scattered ahead, their armor rusted and broken, their faces frozen in expressions of silent terror, each one a testament to the futility of hope in this forsaken place. A metallic tang, sharp and bitter, clung to the back of his throat, a constant reminder of the decay. He tasted it with every breath, a physical manifestation of the despair that clung to the land. It's not cowardice, it's duty. The mantra felt thinner now, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. He felt it then, the probing, a subtle pressure against the edges of his mind, a cold tendril seeking purchase. He reinforced his mental shields, a familiar tightening behind his eyes, a surge of energy pushing back against the intrusion. The Weaver, always present, always watching. He focused on the image of his sister, her laughter echoing in his memory, a beacon against the encroaching shadows. The path opened into a small clearing, dominated by a cairn of blackened stones. A voice, ancient and despairing, seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. A whisper that slithered into his mind. "Turn back, little warden." "There is only oblivion here." He ignored it, pushing the voice away as he had been trained to do. The mantra, strained now, felt like a lifeline. It's not cowardice, it's duty. He circled the cairn, his gaze sweeping the clearing. The probing intensified sharper now, seeking a weakness, a doubt. He felt a flicker of memory, his father's disappointment, the sting of failure, the fear of inadequacy. He crushed it, forcing it down, refusing to give the Weaver any purchase. The metallic taste in his mouth intensified. Another voice, a fragmented echo of the first, resonated within the stones. Your purpose is a lie. Your hope is a delusion. He felt a tremor run through him, a wave of doubt threatening to overwhelm his resolve. He focused on his breathing, slow and deliberate, anchoring himself to the present. It's not fear, he corrected himself. The words a desperate prayer. The shift felt significant, a subtle realignment of his inner landscape. The weaver's probing felt different now, less intrusive, almost curious. He continued onward, the path leading him deeper into the heart of the Shadowlands. The air grew colder, the silence more profound. He felt the weight of the world pressing down on him, the burden of his duty a crushing weight on his shoulders. But he walked on, driven by a flicker of hope, a stubborn refusal to surrender to the darkness. He repeated the mantra, a quiet affirmation in the face of oblivion. It's not fear. The cairn pulsed, a slow, sickening throb against his temple. Each beat resonated with the mantra, fracturing it, twisting the familiar syllables into something alien. Duty, protect, serve. The words felt brittle, like dry leaves crumbling in his grasp. He tasted metal, a bitter tang coating his tongue, a phantom echo of the blood he's spilled, the blood he's yet to spill. The voices hadn't ceased. They were no longer a cacophony of accusation, but a chorus of observation. They sifted through him, not with malice now, but with a detached, almost clinical interest. He clenched his sword hilt, the cold steel a small comfort against the encroaching dread. He pictured Sarah's face, the warmth of her smile, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she laughed. Duty, protect, serve. Duty, protect, serve. The words felt hollow, a desperate plea rather than a shield. The probing intensified, a tendril of sensation slithering into his mind. Not to break, but to examine. He braced himself, expecting the familiar onslaught of despair, the crushing weight of failure. Instead, he felt a flicker, a brief, almost curious resonance from the source of the voices. It was unsettling, more so than the previous assaults. It felt playful. He stumbled, an involuntary physical reaction to the shift. The ground beneath him seemed to ripple, the gray stones blurring into a swirling vortex. He fought to maintain his footing, to cling to the remnants of his resolve. Duty, protect, serve. The mantra stuttered, a broken rhythm against the pulsing of the cairn. Then, a voice distinct from the chorus resonated within his mind. It wasn't a command or a threat. It was a question, a single simple word laced with an unsettling amusement. Why? The question hung in the air, heavier than any accusation. It wasn't directed at him, not precisely. It was a question about the very fabric of his being, the foundation of his purpose. He felt exposed, stripped bare, his motivations laid out for scrutiny. He tried to respond, to reaffirm his commitment, to reiterate the oaths he's sworn. But the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of the question. Duty, protect, serve. The mantra dissolved entirely, leaving him adrift in a sea of doubt. A memory surfaced, unbidden, a shard of sunlight piercing the oppressive gloom. He saw his father laughing, teaching him to carve a wooden bird. The scent of pine shavings filling the air. A pang of longing, sharp and unexpected, twisted in his gut. The question echoed again, softer this time, laced with a hint of pity. Why? He closed his eyes, the image of his father fading, replaced by the cold, gray reality of the Shadowlands. He felt a choice being offered, not spoken, but presented as a shimmering possibility within his mind, a path bathed in false light, leading away from the cairn, away from his duty. A promise of safety, of oblivion. He opened his eyes, the false light receding. He looked back at the cairn, at the pulsing stones, at the source of the unsettling question. He knew with a certainty that transcended logic that the easy path was a lie. He took a step forward, deeper into the heart of the Shadowlands. The corridor pulsed with a light, not of this world, a sickly green that clung to the stone like a damp shroud. The air tasted of ozone and something else, something ancient and indefinable. He walked, boots echoing on the pulsing stones, each step a reformation. Duty, protect, serve. The mantra, once a shield, now felt brittle, a cracked facade against the unsettling silence. The weaver no longer probed. The aggressive questioning, the relentless scrutiny had ceased. Now, it simply watched, her presence vast and indifferent, filling the corridor with an oppressive stillness. It had shifted from a predator to an observer, a detached scholar examining a curious specimen. He stopped before a doorway shimmering with the false light. It beckoned, a promise of warmth and respite from the cold, echoing halls. He could almost feel the sun on his face, the scent of wildflowers carried on a gentle breeze. A memory surfaced, sharp and poignant. His father's calloused hand on his shoulder, the smell of wood smoke clinging to his clothes, the quiet pride in his eyes. Be a good man, his father had said. Protect those who cannot protect themselves. The weaver did not speak. It did not need to. The offer was silent, palpable, radiating from the doorway like heat. A path away, a life unburdened by duty, a chance to simply be. He felt a tremor in his hand, a tightening in his chest. The false light seemed to intensify, its allure almost overwhelming. Be a good man. The words echoed, not his father's now, but a hollow imitation. He closed his eyes, the image of his father fading, replaced by the cold green light. Duty, protect, serve. The words felt like ash in his mouth. He opened his eyes, the false light still shimmering, still offering. Why? He asked, the question a fragile whisper in the vast silence. The weaver did not answer. It simply tilted its unseen head, a gesture of amusement, curiosity. He could not decipher it. The question hung in the air, a challenge, a condemnation. He turned away from the doorway, the false light receding. Duty. To serve. The words felt heavier now, a chain binding him to a purpose he no longer understood. He walked on, the corridor stretching before him, an endless path of echoing stone and oppressive silence. Protect. Serve. The mantra, once a shield, now a crumbling echo. He did not know what lay ahead, only that he would continue. He had to. The green intensified, a suffocating tide that pressed against his eyelids, a physical weight threatening to crush him. The air tasted of ozone, sharp and metallic, a primal scent that prickled his nostrils and tightened his chest. He knelt on the cold, unforgiving stone, the chill seeping through the worn fabric of his tunic, a constant reminder of his vulnerability. Above him, the weaver watched, not with eyes, not as he understood eyes, but with a pervasive presence, a knowing that settled deep within his bones, a resonance that vibrated through his very being. He's been probing, relentlessly, questions, sharp and insistent, burrowing into the recesses of his mind like insidious roots. Purpose, duty, sacrifice. He's answered, recited the oaths ingrained within him, reaffirmed the tenets that defined his existence. But the green deepened. The questions shifted, evolving from a test of adherence to a deeper, more unsettling inquiry. They weren't about what he did, but why. Why? The word echoed in the vast, unseen chamber, bouncing off the unseen ceiling, a hollow reverberation that fractured his certainty and shook the foundations of his beliefs. His father's face swam into view, a spectral image etched with disappointment, a silent rebuke that pierced his resolve. Hold the line, son. The light demands it. He remembered the harsh training, the endless drills, the unwavering belief instilled since childhood, a shield against the encroaching darkness, a beacon for the lost souls adrift in a world teetering on the brink. The weaver tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement, devoid of warmth or empathy. Not a question, but an assessment, a dismissal. He felt the pull. The false light. A deceptive warmth that promised solace, an end to the endless questioning, a release from the crushing weight of responsibility. It whispered of freedom, of release from the burden of duty. It showed him visions, a sun-drenched field ripe with golden grain, a loving embrace from a woman he's only dreamt of, a life unburdened by the weight of the world. His father's face again, younger, smiling, radiating a confidence he now questioned. You are the shield. He clenched his fists, the rough stone grinding against his skin, a physical manifestation of his internal struggle. The visions intensified, seductive and alluring, almost tangible. He could almost taste the sweetness of oblivion, the blissful surrender to a life without purpose. He could almost believe. The weaver's head tilted again, a longer, more deliberate movement, a silent mockery that chipped away at his remaining resolve. Then, a flicker, a distortion within the green light, not warmth, but a ripple in the fabric of reality, a glimpse of something vast and indifferent, lurking beyond the false promise, a cosmic indifference that dwarfed his understanding, rendering his purpose insignificant in the face of eternity. The visions receded, the warmth vanished, leaving him shivering in the cold, the taste of ozone bitter on his tongue. He stood. His legs trembled, unsteady beneath the renewed weight. The weight of the world settled back upon his shoulders, heavier than before, a burden amplified by the glimpse of the void. He looked at the weaver. It remained unchanged, an unblinking presence in the green light, a silent judge of his struggle. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The words were lost, swallowed by the immensity of the chamber, rendered meaningless by the cosmic truth he had briefly glimpsed. He walked on. The green light pulsed, a sickly rhythm against the cold stone. It tasted of ozone, sharp and metallic on his tongue. He walked, each footfall echoing in the vast chamber, a hollow counterpoint to the weaver's silent observation. It hadn't spoken a word since he's been here, yet its presence was a weight, a pressure that squeezed the air from his lungs. He held the vial. It shimmered, a captured fragment of the storm he's faced, the chaos he's contained. It was the elixir, the reward, the proof of his worth, or so he's always believed. The weaver tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement that felt like a judgment. He saw his father then, a fleeting image superimposed on the green light, his father's hand on his shoulder, a proud smile, the words, "Serve, and you will be rewarded." Rewarded with what? He's always assumed it was purpose, belonging. Now, the question clawed at him, a persistent, gnawing doubt. He walked again, the stone floor slick beneath his boots, the elixir pulsed in his hand, a mocking imitation of life. He saw a field then, bathed in sunlight, a woman's laughter carried on the breeze, a life he's never known, a life stolen by duty. Was this the reward? The constant reminder of what he's sacrificed? The weaver tilted its head again. He saw his father again, younger, his face etched with a worry he's never acknowledged before. A whisper, lost in the years, "Is it worth it, son?" The question hung in the air, heavier than the stone, heavier than the silence. He stumbled, the vial nearly slipping from his grasp. He saw the cosmos then, a vast, indifferent expanse of stars and dust, a swirling vortex of nothingness, swallowing everything, erasing every trace of his existence, his purpose, his duty, his father's legacy, all insignificant, swallowed by the void. He walked again, the green light blurring at the edges of his vision. He saw his father again, his face a mask of unwavering resolve. A memory, sharp and clear, his father's voice, firm and unwavering. There is no questioning. There is only serving. But the words felt brittle now, a fragile shield against the encroaching darkness. He stopped. The green light pulsed, a relentless beat against his skull. He saw his father again, his face dissolving into the swirling chaos of the cosmos. A single word, lost in the void. Why? He opened his mouth to speak, to articulate the questions that had consumed him. to challenge the foundations of his existence, but the words caught in his throat, choked by the weight of the silence, the immensity of the void. He closed his mouth. He stood, a solitary figure in the green light, the elixir held loosely in his hand. He said nothing,